Fan hoi 1. Tuet voi, toisi sang tak emotika chien kin di sat di hoi, dak dao va hap dan theo yuka kwa ban, duok chia ton 12 fan, voi fan 1 duok trin bai dui de bang tiang on cho ti truong mai. Toisi dam bao kak tin tit va kot trien lumwami va sang tao, kong by trung lap voi kak ken kin di de ko. The Silent Siren, Part 1, The First Whisper. The rain in Silverwood was less of a shower and more of a judgment. It had been falling for 3 days, washing the already dim streets of the forgotten logging town with a permanent, unsettling sheen. Detective Elias Thorne was a man carved from granite, but even his stoicism was starting to crack under the endless drumming against the precinct window. Thorne had relocated to Silverwood after a high-profile case in the city went sideways, a case he still saw in the chrome reflection of his coffee cup. He was here to find quiet. Silverwood, apparently, was here to deny him. His new partner, Officer Lena Reyes, was the town's only splash of color, a sharp, young mind with a nervous energy that belied her competence. She was tracing the outline of a local map with a finger that trembled slightly. "The Mill District, Detective," she said, her voice barely cutting through the storm's roar. "Another one. 3 disappearances in 3 weeks, all from the same 5-block radius." Thorne leaned over the map, his eyes focusing on the cluster of abandoned warehouses. No ransom notes. No struggle. No forced entry. Just, gone. And all 3 were transients. Easy targets. "The locals call it the Silent Hall," Reyes muttered, her gaze fixed on a spot near the old Blackwood sawmill. "They say it's always been this way. Every few decades, when the rain settles in like this, people just vanish. Like the town itself is weeding its garden." Thorne dismissed the local folklore with a grunt. "We're not chasing ghosts, Reyes. We're chasing a killer who knows how to move silently and quickly. Whoever this is, they're precise." The call came just as the streetlights flickered on, casting long, jaundiced shadows. It wasn't about a new disappearance. It was about a discovery. "Dispatch says there's a body," Reyes said, already reaching for her coat. "Down by the old intake dam. It's partial." The scene was a mess of mud and slick, moss-covered concrete. The dam was a forgotten relic, a wall of gray stone perpetually weeping water. The downpour had momentarily eased, leaving the air heavy and cold. The victim was a male, identified by his remaining papers as a drifter named Marcus Reed. But it wasn't the decomposition or the mud that stopped Thorne cold. It was the absolute, surgical cleanliness of the wound. The body was bisected, cut perfectly at the waist. There was no jagged tearing, no messy blood spatter like a typical dismemberment. The cut was a single, flawless line, almost cauterized, leaving the exposed flesh a strange, pale pink. It looked less like the work of a psycho with a hacksaw and more like a medical procedure gone catastrophically wrong. "Not a knife, Detective," Reyes whispered, her hand clamped over her mouth. "That's not trauma. That's geometry." Thorne knelt, ignoring the cold seepage of water into his trousers. He ran a gloved finger along the pristine edge. The killer hadn't just cut the man, they had somehow sealed the cut, almost instantly. And then he saw it, etched lightly onto the victim's pale, intact upper torso, just below the collarbone, was a symbol. It was a perfect, thin circle, the size of a quarter, with 3 radial lines extending outward, like a stylized alarm bell. It was too small to be noticed easily, too perfect to be casual vandalism. "Reyes," Thorne said, his voice low and dangerous, "dust this body. Every inch. And check the symbol. I want to know who uses a mark like this." As Reyes began her work, Thorne looked up. The Mill District's skeletal silhouette seemed to be watching them from the hills. He felt a profound, chilling certainty that wasn't about a man hiding in the shadows with a sharp tool. This wasn't about simple murder. This was about collection. And the symbol was the brand of the collector. A faint, high-pitched whine seemed to pierce the silence between raindrops, like a distant, distorted siren, but only Thorn seemed to hear it. It was gone as quickly as it came, leaving him alone with the impossible cut and the chilling realization, whoever, or whatever, was doing the silent haul, they weren't trying to hide their work. They were trying to perfect it. Would you like me to continue with Part 2, where Detective Thorn discovers a disturbing pattern in the victims' backgrounds and the true function of the strange symbol? Fan Hoi 2. The Silent Siren, Part 2, The Perfect Harvest. Thorn stood over the remnants of Marcus Reed, the faint, high-frequency whine of the silent siren still echoing in his ears. It wasn't a sound a human should make. "Detective," Reyes called out, her voice tight, holding up a small evidence bag. "The symbol. I found trace particles in the incision wound and inside the circle mark. It's some kind of synthetic polymer, almost crystalline. Nothing we have on file." Thorn examined the symbol again. The stylized alarm bell. "The symbol is a signature, Reyes, but it's also a tool. It looks like it was burned in, not carved. What about the cut itself? How do you get that clean a separation?" "The medical examiner is baffled," Reyes admitted. "No thermal damage, no serration. It's like the molecular bonds just gave up. They're running a deeper toxicology report, but they suspect we're looking at something that causes instant, localized cellular disruption." Thorn ignored the scientific jargon and focused on the victims. He pulled up the files on the 3 missing individuals, including Reed. Marcus Reed, body found male, 40s. Drifter. History of severe chronic heart issues. Sarah Klein, missing female, 20s. Student dropout. Suffered from acute, drug-resistant epilepsy. David Chin, missing male, 50s. Former engineer. Diagnosed with aggressive, stage 4 lung cancer. Thorn circled their afflictions on the whiteboard: heart, epilepsy, cancer. "Reyes," Thorn stated, pointing at the board. "Look past the fact they're transients. What do these 3 people have in common medically? They were all suffering from severe, system-wide illnesses. Conditions that were terminal or close to it." Reyes's eyes widened. "The killer isn't choosing them because they're easy to dispose of. They're choosing them because they're sick. But why? Is this some kind of sick mercy killing?" "No," Thorn growled, recalling the geometric perfection of the cut. "Mercy is messy. This is efficient. And why cut Reed in half? If you want them dead, a bullet works fine. No, the cutting is part of the process." He turned to the Silverwood Public Library's digital archives, searching for any historical reports on the silent hall phenomenon. The results were thin, mostly fragmented and sensationalized pieces from the 1920s and 1950s, the previous 2 major cycles of disappearances. He found one old newspaper clipping from 1958, yellowed and barely legible, reporting on the disappearance of 3 lumberjacks. A crude drawing accompanied the text, a sketch of a bizarre contraption the loggers were allegedly building before they vanished. The headline read, "Eccentric Loggers Attempt to Harvest Perfect Wood." "Look at this, Reyes," Thorn said, zooming in on the sketch. It depicted a large, cylindrical machine with 3 radial spokes, an almost exact, albeit industrial, match for the symbol on Reed's body. They were trying to build a machine based on that symbol? Reyes murmured. "Or the symbol is the blueprint," Thorn corrected. "And it's not what they were trying to harvest. It's people." He instructed Reyes to cross-reference the locations of the current disappearances with the locations of the 1958 and 1928 incidents. The data plotted on the map, forming a tight, repeating pattern. "It's a triangle, Detective," Reyes pointed out. "A perfect isosceles triangle. All 3 points converging on the oldest part of the mill district." "The Blackwood sawmill," Thorn finished, looking at the center of the triangle. The abandoned structure was a behemoth of rusting steel and splintered timber, rumored to be haunted. "That's our killer's workshop. We're going in." As they drove toward the mill, the rain intensified, turning the dirt road into a churning river of mud. The faint, silent whine returned, this time louder, seemingly vibrating in the air itself. Thorn gripped the steering wheel, his knuckles white. "You hear that, Reyes?" he asked, his voice low. Reyes shook her head, nervously glancing out the side window at the dense, oppressive pine forest. "Hear what, detective?" "The siren," Thorn said, his eyes narrowed. "It's calling us to the harvest." When they arrived at the mill, the air was eerily still despite the storm. A massive, derelict crane stood sentinel over the main loading bay. The heavy steel door was sealed shut with a rusted padlock. "Too quiet," Thorn murmured, pulling out his service weapon. He kicked the door once, hard, shattering the ancient lock. As the door groaned open on rusted hinges, an overwhelming, clinical smell hit them, not of decay, but of sterilized metal and ozone. The floor of the mill was immaculate, scrubbed clean of sawdust. In the center, under the reach of the crane, was a single object bathed in a pool of dim, flickering emergency light. It was a massive, cylindrical vat, nearly 8 feet high, humming with low-frequency energy. Affixed to the side of the vat was a metal plaque. Etched onto it was the chilling name of the apparatus, the Purification Array. And surrounding the base of the vat, resting in individual, clear polymer trays, were the upper torsos of Sarah Klein and David Chin. They were pristine, unmarked, and separated from their lower halves by the same impossible, perfect cut. Their eyes were open, staring blankly at the ceiling. "Oh God," Reyes gasped, stumbling back. Thorn approached the vat slowly, his weapon steady. He saw a panel with a screen flickering near the top. On the screen was a simple digital readout, a chilling piece of data left for the police to find. Purification Array status. Target biomass collected, 3 out of 4. Purity index, 99.9%. Next harvest cycle initiation, 5 minutes. 3 out of 4, Reyes, Thorn whispered, scanning the cavernous room for the operator. "They're missing one. And we have 5 minutes until whatever that thing does next." He pointed the beam of his flashlight at the floor. Leading away from the vat were 2 perfect, narrow tracks, too uniform to be boot prints. They looked like the tracks of a narrow, 3-wheeled device, a small, silent vehicle, designed for stealth and carrying a heavy, precious payload. The siren had led them to the collection point. Now, they needed to find the operator. Would you like me to continue with Part 3, where Thorn and Reyes pursue the collector, discovering a link between the purified biomass and the history of Silverwood itself? Fanhoy 3. The Silent Siren, Part 3, The Operator and the Origin. The countdown timer on the Purification Array screen, ticking down to the next harvest cycle initiation, was the only sound besides the distant roar of the storm. 5 minutes, Reyes stammered, raising her weapon and sweeping the massive warehouse. "It has to be automated, detective. Or the operator is still here." Thorn ignored the adrenaline pumping through him, his focus razor sharp. "The tracks, Reyes. They lead out. The operator isn't here, but the machine is still alive. The target biomass needs to be transported to the array, and the array needs power. We shut it down." He rushed to the back of the vat, expecting heavy industrial conduits. Instead, he found a sleek control panel, almost seamless with the metallic surface. The tracks led directly under a large, secured floor hatch near the back wall. "This is too clean for a local operation, Reyes. This tech, it's specialized." As Thorn examined the power source, Reyes was drawn to the digital readout. The purity index was not a measure of collected material, but of the condition of the bodies inside the trays. "Detective, look at the trays," Reyes said, pointing. The bodies, they're not decomposing. They're being preserved. And the lower halves, the parts with the major organs, they're gone. The killer is only taking the torso and the head. The biomass is just the diseased tissue, Thorne realized, the horror solidifying into a grim logic. The cancer, the heart damage, the epilepsy, that's what they don't want. The purification array isn't harvesting organs, it's extracting something else entirely. Suddenly, the floor hatch at the end of the tracks began to retract with a quiet hiss, revealing a steep, dark ramp leading down into the mill's foundation. A blast of cold, stale air and the distinct, metallic scent of iron rushed out. A vehicle emerged. It was a small, motorized trolley, low to the ground, designed to maneuver easily. On the rear, secured by polymer restraints, was a pale, unconscious man. This was the fourth, missing target, Jason Price, a homeless man known to have a severe, chronic brain aneurysm. The man was alive, but the stylized circle and 3 radial lines, the signature symbol, was already etched into his chest, glowing with a faint, internal blue light. The light pulsed in time with the countdown timer. Freeze! Police! Thorne yelled, raising his pistol, but the trolley had no driver. It was guided by a rudimentary, boxy control unit mounted on the front. It silently wheeled the unconscious man towards the vat, the final piece for the array. Reyes, stop the array. I'll take the trolley. Reyes frantically searched the control panel for an emergency shutoff, while Thorne sprinted toward the approaching trolley. He lunged, catching the trolley's side as it began to ascend a short ramp to the vat. Thorne smashed the control box with the butt of his pistol. Sparks flew, and the trolley shuddered to a stop inches from the main vat. The blue light on Jason Price's chest flickered and died. Just as the timer hit 1 second, Reyes slammed her fist down on a red, unmarked button she'd found. The array instantly powered down. The humming stopped. Silence descended, heavy and absolute. A moment later, a small, static-laced burst of radio transmission emanated from the broken control box on the trolley. It wasn't human speech, but a short, synthesized data burst. Thorne recognized the pattern. It was a secure frequency, a military-grade encryption key. Reyes, check the ramp. The operator had to be down there. They descended the ramp, which led to a series of stone tunnels, surprisingly dry and well-maintained. The tunnels opened into a single, circular subterranean chamber. The walls were lined not with logs or concrete, but with intricate, copper-plated insulation panels. In the center of the chamber was a desk. Sitting before a bank of old, humming computers was the operator. He was an elderly man, thin and frail, wearing a threadbare military jacket with a faded patch on the shoulder, an alarm bell with 3 radial lines. This time, the symbol wasn't abstract, it was the logo of a defunct, clandestine government project from the early Cold War era. The man wasn't armed. He wasn't even startled. He was simply watching an ancient, black and white video loop playing on one of his monitors. The video showed a group of scientists in lab coats, enthusiastically pointing at a large, cylindrical prototype, the same apparatus sketched in the 1958 newspaper clipping. "You're too late, Detective Thorne," the operator said, his voice raspy but calm. "The 4th specimen was compromised. But the array is ready." "Who are you?" Thorne demanded, his pistol aimed squarely at the man's head. "Why are you mutilating these people?" "My name is Elias Vance," the man replied, tapping the screen showing the old prototype. "And I am merely finishing the work of Project Siren." He finally turned to them. His eyes were milky white, covered by a dense, cataract film. He was blind. The mill district was a cover for a deep earth facility, Vance explained, motioning toward the copper-lined walls. During the Cold War, they weren't cutting wood, they were cutting corners. Project Siren was designed to extract pure consciousness energy from subjects with terminal afflictions. The theory was that pure, singular focus on pain, on impending death, once separated from the distraction of a healthy body, could be harnessed as a limitless energy source. A weapon. You're taking the pain, Reyes breathed, horrified. No, officer. We're taking the energy generated by the impending cessation of life, Vance corrected. The symbol is the harmonic separator. It focuses the energy and allows the array to make the perfect, non-traumatic cut. The lower halves, the diseased parts, are simply waste. The purified upper torsos are the battery casing. Vance smiled, a look of serene mania crossing his face. The energy extracted from the 3 perfect subjects is already stored. It's enough to broadcast the silent siren into the deep structure of Silverwood's rock foundation. He pointed to a large, metallic antenna descending from the ceiling. What does the siren do? Thorn asked, stepping closer. Vance's blind eyes fixed on some point beyond Thorn. It doesn't kill. It prepares. This town was built on a massive, stable geological fault line. The siren frequency resonates with the deepest layer of granite. When the energy broadcasts, the entire foundation of Silverwood will be tuned, like a massive tuning fork. It creates the perfect grid. For what? For the final harvest, Vance whispered, gesturing toward the copper walls. You see, we only needed 4 terminals for the array. But the project requires 1 million. And when the grid is tuned, Detective, everyone in Silverwood, sick or healthy, will become an available conduit. Elias Vance had the motivation and the means. Now, Thorn and Reyes had to stop the mad scientist from turning the entire town into an energy source. Would you like me to continue with Part 4, where Thorn must navigate the labyrinthine tunnels of the Siren Project while the scientist initiates the final, town-wide broadcast? Fan Hoi 4. The Silent Siren, Part 4, The Tuning Fork. Thorn gripped his pistol tighter, the revelation of Elias Vance's chilling plan replacing his initial shock with cold determination. The threat had escalated from a serial killer to a town-wide catastrophe rooted in Cold War paranoia. Reyes, secure the subject, Thorn ordered, never taking his eyes off Vance. Vance, you stop the broadcast. Now. Vance chuckled, a dry, rattling sound. The broadcast is not a switch, Detective. It's a chain reaction. The energy from the 3 collected subjects is already feeding into the antenna. I am merely the initiator. With a swift, practiced motion that belied his age and blindness, Vance struck a key on the control panel. A series of low-frequency, subsonic thumps resonated through the chamber. The copper-plated walls began to glow faintly, humming with the familiar, high-pitched whine that Thorn now recognized as the true silent siren. Reyes moved swiftly, but Vance was ready. He flipped his desk, revealing a secure containment unit attached to the floor. You can't stop the signal now. It's already in the deep rock. Thorn fired a shot, intentionally grazing the main monitor panel, shattering the screen displaying the subterranean blueprints. The blueprints won't save you, Thorn, Vance shouted over the rising hum. The signal will vibrate the fault line until every living cell in Silverwood resonates at the same frequency. Then, the array will move beyond purification and begin the true harvest. Thorn realized capturing Vance was secondary to neutralizing the broadcast. He looked up at the antenna, a large, black metallic spire disappearing into the ceiling above. Reyes, find the primary conduit running from the array upstairs to this antenna. We cut the power, we stopped the broadcast. Reyes, already familiarizing herself with the layout, pointed to a thick bundle of insulated cables disappearing into a fissure in the rock wall. That way, Detective. It looks like a maintenance tunnel. Thorn kicked the overturned desk aside. Vance is blind, but he knows these tunnels. We need to move fast. As they ran into the tight, curving maintenance tunnel, the subsonic vibration intensified. It wasn't just audible, it was physical. Thorn felt a deep, nauseating tremor in his chest and teeth. The resonance is affecting my balance. Reyes gasped, steadying herself against the damp wall. If this is what it feels like down here, what's happening on the surface? Thorn pulled out his radio, attempting to contact the precinct, but received only a shriek of static. The broadcast is jamming all signals. We're on our own. They followed the conduits for what felt like an eternity, the path winding and steep, ascending back towards the mill floor. They burst through a final manhole cover, emerging into a small, dusty storage room adjacent to the main mill floor. The difference was immediate and terrifying. Upstairs, the effect of the siren was amplified tenfold. Every piece of rusted metal in the mill was rattling violently. The floor itself seemed to be pulsing. Thorn saw the main power conduit, a massive, reinforced cable, running along the ceiling and feeding directly into the back of the purification array vat. We need to sever that cable, Reyes. Just as they moved, the heavy steel door to the storage room slammed shut behind them, plunging them into darkness. He's faster than he looks, Thorn muttered, pulling out his flashlight. A thin, metallic scrape echoed from the main mill floor. Thorn shone his light out through a narrow gap in the storage room door. Vance was standing by the array, no longer frail, but moving with a mechanical purpose. He had retrieved a small, wheeled cart carrying what looked like a plasma cutter. Vance was not cutting the power, he was reinforcing the array for the final stage. Detective Thorn, Vance's voice boomed, amplified and distorted by the resonating structure of the mill. You may have stopped the initial collection, but the grid is nearly tuned. The energy is stable. Now, I simply have to open the connection. Vance reached out and touched the main vat. The siren whine peaked, becoming a painful, drilling sensation in Thorn's skull. Then, the array began to shift. The base of the vat split into three massive, articulating hydraulic arms. The upper torsos of the victims, Sarah Klein and David Chen, were lifted out of their trays. The arms positioned the bodies, still pristine and staring blankly, directly beneath the giant, rusted crane. The battery casings are being put in place, Reyes whispered, terrified. Thorn saw the true, horrific purpose of the mill structure. The crane wasn't for moving logs, it was the mechanism for the grand broadcast. Reyes, find an explosive. Anything. We have to destroy that conduit before he connects those bodies. Thorn kicked the storage room door, but it was barred from the outside. They were trapped, forced to watch the final, sickening stage of the siren project commence. As the hydraulic arms locked the three purified torsos into position, a massive bolt of blue-white energy arced from the main conduit, running down the crane, and striking the symbol on the chest of David Chin. The body did not burn. Instead, a brilliant, non-thermal light began to pulse outwards from the symbol, engulfing the body. The silent siren was now fully active. Would you like me to continue with Part 5, where Thorn and Reyes escape the room, confronting Vance as the first catastrophic effects of the town-wide broadcast begin to manifest? Fanhoy 5. The Silent Siren, Part 5, Resonance Cascade. The blue-white light pulsing from the three suspended torsos was blinding, and the resonant frequency of the silent siren intensified, turning the mill into a gigantic, howling instrument. The vibrations were so severe that Thorn could see the surface of his own skin rippling. Detective, the entire structure is coming apart. Reyes yelled, clutching her head. Plaster rained down from the ceiling, and a large support beam creaked ominously. Thorn spotted the solution in the back corner of the storage room, a stack of ancient, unstable drums marked with faded hazard symbols, nitrocellulose. Highly flammable and explosive. The old mill supplies, Reyes. We can use this as a charge. Thorn grabbed a heavy length of discarded chain and began wrapping it around the neck of the nearest drum. Get back. I'm going to blast the lock off the door. He braced himself and threw the chain around the steel door handle, anchoring the other end to the drum. He then drew his weapon and aimed precisely at the drum's fuse point. Crack! The shot was swallowed by the mill's massive roar. The door buckled inward with a flash and a thick cloud of dust and acrid smoke. Go! Cut the power! Thorn ordered, running out of the damaged room, shielding his face from the intense light emanating from the crane. Vance, standing near the array, didn't turn. His blind eyes were fixed on his masterpiece. He seemed to be deriving pleasure from the pain, his face contorted in ecstatic triumph. "You are too late for physics, detective." Vance's amplified voice boomed. "The energy is now flowing from the grid. It is irreversible." Thorn and Reyes sprinted toward the massive power conduit running along the ceiling. They could feel the immense power, a static electricity that stood their hair on end and made their skin crawl. Suddenly, a violent tremor shook the floor. The tremor was localized, originating not from the ground, but from within the building. Reyes stumbled and pointed towards the broken windows of the mill. "Detective, look outside." The rain had stopped. But the streets of Silverwood, visible through the gaps in the rusty siding, were beginning to buckle. Asphalt was cracking along a perfectly straight line, and the parked police cruiser's glass spontaneously shattered. It was a localized, focused destruction along the engineered fault line. The town was actively separating. The perfect grid, Thorn breathed, the scope of Vance's madness finally hitting him. Thorn pulled out the plasma cutter Vance had abandoned earlier. It was cumbersome, designed for steel beams, not cables. "Reyes, distract him. Give me a clean angle on the conduit." Reyes, despite her fear, did not hesitate. She grabbed a heavy, metal pipe and charged toward Vance, using the chaos and noise as cover. "You call this purification, Vance? You're tearing this town apart," she screamed. Vance finally reacted, moving with surprising agility for a man his age. He reached down and pulled a hidden lever on the control panel. The array roared. The lights on the three bodies intensified to an unbearable, supernova white. Vance pointed an accusing finger at Reyes, his voice a chilling monotone. "The system is isolating the conduits, officer. And you are interfering with the process. The grid must be silent." As Vance spoke, three things happened simultaneously. A deafening pop echoed from the array. The three corpses, having served their purpose, disintegrated into fine, pale ash. The massive crane cable, no longer carrying the power, snapped, whipping against the ceiling. The main conduit, now exposed, began to hiss with white-hot energy. Thorn activated the plasma cutter, the arc torch spitting a searing jet of fire. He jumped, bracing the cutter against the ceiling, aiming for the core of the humming conduit. The energy surged back at him, burning his gloved hand instantly. He gritted his teeth, pushing the cutter deeper. Meanwhile, Reyes was struggling with Vance. The blind man, suddenly possessing strength, had grabbed her arm with a vice-like grip. "The town's pain is my strength, officer. I am the conductor." He shoved Reyes backward, sending her sprawling across the mill floor. She hit the floor hard, her weapon flying away. "It's finished," Vance shouted, turning to face Thorn, who was moments from severing the cable. "The signal is in the rock. The frequency is stable. The grid is open." Thorn heard the thud as the cable finally gave way. Sparks erupted like a violent firework display. The mill instantly plunged into absolute darkness, and the deafening whine stopped. Silence, heavy, sudden, and complete, replaced the noise. Thorn fell from the ceiling, landing hard on the concrete floor, the plasma cutter skittering away. He was deafened by the sudden lack of sound. "Did we stop it?" Reyes whispered, struggling to her feet. Thorn shook his head, pointing a shaky finger at the now dark array. The main power conduit was severed, yes, but a smaller, secondary wire was still running from the control panel down into the floor. We stopped the input, Thorn coughed, wiping blood from his ear. But the grid is still active. The resonance has been established. In the corner, Vance was laughing silently, his chest rising and falling rapidly. The grid is running on the town now, Detective, Vance croaked, his voice returning to normal volume. The energy is self-sustaining. And the final command is already transmitted. Vance slowly reached into his military jacket pocket and pulled out a crude, antique detonator with a single, massive plunger. The perfect grid needs a final shock to fully initiate the harvest, Vance announced, holding the plunger over the device. A massive, localized energy discharge. A seismic trigger. Thorn and Reyes stared at the device, recognizing the immediate and terrifying danger. Vance, Thorn said, his voice flat, what have you wired that to? Vance simply smiled, a terrible, triumphant grin that crinkled his blind eyes. The foundation of the Blackwood sawmill, Detective. Your efforts were commendable, but Silverwood is about to become the world's first and greatest energy capacitor. The clock was ticking. Vance had the trigger, and the whole town was now a live, ticking bomb. Would you like me to continue with Part 6, where Thorn and Reyes must disarm Vance's seismic trigger and confront the possibility that the resonance has already altered the townsfolk? Fanhoy 6. The Silent Siren, Part 6, The Energy Capacitor. The detonator in Vance's hand was a horrifying relic, a tangible link between his Cold War madness and the present catastrophe. Drop it, Vance! Thorn yelled, recovering his pistol and aiming it at the scientist's head. Vance remained unmoved, his thumb resting lightly on the plunger. If you shoot, Detective, the resulting kinetic shock may be enough to trigger the blast anyway. This entire structure is now tuned to a seismic hairline trigger. Reyes, thinking fast, moved cautiously toward the exit. We need to get outside and warn the town, Detective. It's too late for a town-wide warning, Officer, Vance stated, his voice calm and precise. The resonance established by the siren means that all internal communications, cellular, landline, radio, are still scrambled. And even if you could speak, who would believe the police department of Silverwood is currently engaged in a philosophical battle over pure consciousness energy? Thorn lowered his weapon slightly. He knew Vance was right. Panic now would guarantee disaster. What happens when you push that plunger, Vance? What's the harvest? When the seismic charge fires, it will create a localized void where the mill once stood, Vance explained with academic detachment. Because the town is resonating, the perfect grid, every single living organism will naturally seek to fill that void. The consciousness energy, the very essence of life, will be drawn and collected in a rapid, catastrophic event. A million singular points of pain converging into one limitless energy source. He patted the detonator like a favorite toy. And I will be the architect of humanity's true, final potential. Thorn glanced at Reyes, giving her a subtle nod towards the secondary conduit, the thin wire running from the control panel into the ground, likely feeding the detonator. You're a monster, Vance, Thorn said, keeping his voice steady, buying Reyes precious seconds. You're killing an entire town based on a failed government experiment. Failed? Vance scoffed. Project Siren failed because of bureaucracy, not physics. They lacked the perfect subjects and the dedicated focus. I have achieved both. As Vance gloated, Reyes silently crept along the perimeter, moving into the deeper shadows where the destroyed mill floor was uneven. Thorn kept his eyes locked on Vance's blind face. If this is about energy, why did you wait? Why use the 3 victims as batteries, only to detonate the charge now? The collection was necessary to overcome the natural damping effect of the environment, Vance explained. The energy required to tune a fault line is immense. Now that the grid is tuned, it only requires a spark. A single, focused thud to initiate the flow. Thorn moved an inch to the left, drawing Vance's focus. And what about you, Vance? You're standing right on top of your void. You'll be consumed too. A small sacrifice for a greater discovery, Vance said serenely. I will become one with the pure consciousness, detective. My life's work completed. Suddenly, Reyes emerged from the shadows, her eyes fixed on the thin secondary wire running across the floor near the edge of the pit. She had found a piece of broken glass, a jagged shard from the shattered cruiser window. In a swift, decisive move, Reyes dropped low and slashed the glass across the wire. Bzzzt. The wire sparked violently and then went dead. Vance reacted instantly. He roared in rage, his composure shattering. The connection. You fool. You've ruined the timing. He slammed his thumb down on the plunger. Click. Nothing happened. The detonator was dead. Thorne charged forward, tackling the suddenly flailing Vance. The frail scientist, driven by a final burst of maniacal adrenaline, fought back fiercely, thrashing against Thorne's grip. You can't stop the harvest. Vance shrieked. The energy is already active. Thorne pinned Vance's arms and wrenched the detonator away, throwing it into the rubble. Reyes, cuff him. As Reyes secured the old man, a new sound began to permeate the massive warehouse, replacing the siren's whine. It was a faint, yet unsettling, singing. Thorne and Reyes froze. The singing was indistinct, slightly off-key, and seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere at once. It was a chorus of voices, layered and overlapping. What is that? Reyes whispered, her hand instinctively going to her sidearm. Vance, now slumped against the wall, looked up, a look of profound satisfaction on his blind face. The grid is open, Vance announced softly. The town is resonating. The voices you hear, detective, are the Silverwood consciousness. They are unified. Thorne cautiously moved to the broken window. The streets were still cracked, but the destruction had ceased. A figure was walking down the middle of the street, a local man Thorne recognized, Mr. Henderson, the town's elderly postman. Henderson was walking with a strange, unnatural gait. His face was devoid of expression, but his lips were moving. He was one of the singers. As Thorne watched, the postman slowly turned his head. His eyes locked onto the broken window of the mill. He wasn't looking at Thorne, he was looking through him, with an unnerving, singular focus. Then, Mr. Henderson began to walk toward the mill. And he wasn't alone. From every house, every corner, and every alleyway, people were emerging. They were moving in unison, their faces pale and blank, all contributing to the unsettling, layered chorus of the siren song. They were all heading toward the Blackwood sawmill. The harvest isn't a detonation, detective, Vance concluded, a final triumph in his voice. It's a mass convergence. They are walking into the void themselves. Would you like me to continue with Part 7, where Thorne and Reyes find themselves trapped in the mill as the unified townsfolk begin their silent march towards the void, and they must find a way to break the resonance? Fanhoy 7. The Silent Siren, Part 7, the Unifying Chorus. The sight of the entire populace of Silverwood, an unsettling river of pale, singing figures, marching toward the mill was a new dimension of horror. They were not panicked or possessed, they were simply drawn, compelled by the deep, physical resonance in the earth. They're walking right into the collapsed foundation. Reyes cried, pulling her weapon and moving to the broken doorway. We have to stop them. We have to break the line. Thorne grabbed her arm, his grip iron tight. Look at them, Reyes. They're unified. They won't hear us. If we try to physically intervene, we'll be fighting the whole town. He looked back at Vance, who was still smiling serenely, handcuffed to a damaged support beam. The energy flow, Vance. If the grid is active, where is the power source? The power is everywhere, detective, Vance replied, tilting his head as if enjoying the growing chorus outside. The perfect grid uses the geological fault line as its amplifier, the buildings as its condensers, and the inhabitants as its current. The energy flows from the collective consciousness into the core of the mill, sustaining the resonance. Thorne scanned the remnants of the array. The main conduit was severed, the crane disconnected, but the secondary wire that Reyes had cut was still feeding into the ground near the center of the room, the location of the seismic charge. The resonance is centered here, Thorne realized. It's radiating outwards from the mill's foundation, forcing them to converge. To stop them, we don't just stop the broadcast, we have to reverse the polarity of the field. The first wave of Silverwood citizens reached the mill's massive loading bay doors. They were moving with a slow, deliberate pace, their faces empty, their eyes glazed over. The humming chorus grew louder, almost drowning out the sound of their shuffling feet. "They'll be here in minutes, Detective," Reyes said, checking the ammunition in her pistol. "We can't let them cross the threshold." "We can't fight them, Reyes, but we can try to disrupt them," Thorne said, grabbing the large, sparking transformer box near where the main conduit had been severed. Vance talked about energy collection. "If we can overload the system with raw, chaotic power, we might break the focus." He pointed to the array's core. "We need to reconnect the primary power line to the harmonic separator interface, but feed it with a massive, uncontrolled jolt. It's a risk, it could kill us or blow the mill sky high." "We don't have a choice," Reyes agreed, already moving to grab the thick, insulated cable from the ceiling. As they worked frantically, the silent singers began to file into the mill through the broken door, their movement unhurried and mechanical. They flowed past the 3 polymer trays and the remnants of the dissected bodies without a glance. Mr. Henderson, the postman, was leading the first group. His vacant eyes focused on the gaping, unstable hole in the center of the mill floor, the destined void. "They're almost on us," Reyes grunted, wrestling the heavy, arcing cable toward the array's damaged console. "Vance, how long does the grid take to stabilize the energy flow once the convergence starts?" Thorne demanded, his voice strained. Vance watched the townsfolk with an almost parental pride. "Once the first 10 subjects enter the void, the system will achieve critical density. The harvest will be irreversible. You have, perhaps, 90 seconds. Thorne and Reyes managed to guide the massive, high-voltage cable to the scorched remnants of the array's input panel. Sparks flew and the air crackled with ozone. "Now, we need a source of high-frequency interference," Reyes, Thorne instructed. "Something chaotic that isn't the siren's frequency." Reyes, thinking back to the static burst from the trolley, remembered a box of discarded radio equipment in the storage room. She bolted back toward the blast-damaged room, dodging the slowly advancing crowd. Thorne braced himself as the first figures, including the postman, reached the pit. They paused, their singing chorus reaching a terrifying pitch, a sound that seemed to pull the breath from Thorne's lungs. The postman raised a foot, preparing to step into the void. Reyes burst back out of the storage room, holding a battered, old police radio, the kind they used for internal, non-scrambled communication before the city upgrade. "I found a power source and an open channel," she yelled, slamming the radio's antenna against the exposed wiring near the severed cable. "Turn it on. Full volume. Find the loudest, most chaotic signal you can," Thorne ordered. Reyes flipped the radio to the emergency channel, cranking the volume to maximum. Instead of police dispatch, they were met with a deafening, chaotic squall of white noise, a raw, unmodulated burst of static electricity and frequency interference. The white noise was the antithesis of the siren's perfect, unified tone. When the static hit the wires, the exposed conduits of the array screamed in protest. The entire mill structure shuddered, but this time, the tremor was erratic and uncontrolled. The postman, his foot inches from the void, staggered. The horrifying, unified singing broke. The chorus became fractured, replaced by individual moans and expressions of confusion. The townsfolk stopped, clutching their heads, their pale faces twisting in pain as the chaotic static fought the resonant frequency in their minds. "It's working!" Reyes shouted over the roar of the static. "The white noise is scrambling the perfect grid." Thorn moved to Vance, who was now writhing against the handcuffs. "You've broken the focus!" Vance shrieked, his blind eyes rolling wildly. "The energy is destabilizing. You're destroying the grid. If you want to live, Vance, you tell me how to shut down the resonance permanently." Thorn demanded, pressing his pistol against Vance's temple. "The white noise is temporary. It's still in the rock." Vance hesitated, fighting the pain of the chaotic frequency. "The only way to completely neutralize the resonance in the rock is to introduce an anti-frequency, a counter-signal, and you must fire it from the primary antenna." He pointed with a desperate, shaking hand toward the hole in the ceiling where the main antenna led down into the subterranean chamber. "You need to send a signal that speaks only of silence." "Would you like me to continue with Part 8, where Thorn and Reyes descend back into Vance's lair, forced to use the deranged scientist's own equipment to broadcast that anti-frequency of silence?" Fanhoy 8. The Silent Siren, Part 8, The Counter-Signal. The deafening shriek of static from the police radio was holding the townsfolk at bay. They stood frozen, agonizingly caught between the compulsion of the silent siren and the chaotic disruption of the white noise. "The anti-frequency, Vance. Where do we find it?" Thorn demanded, pushing the barrel of his pistol hard against the scientist's temple. "My lab. Downstairs." Vance gasped, his voice strained by the auditory assault. "I created the counter-signal as a failsafe. A way to shut down the grid if the energy spiked. It's encrypted. A file named Quiet on the main console." Thorn didn't hesitate. He secured Vance's handcuffs to the support beam and pointed at Reyes. "Keep the radio running. Don't let that static die. I'm going back down." "Be careful, Detective," Reyes warned, her eyes darting between Thorn and the groaning, suffering figures in the loading bay. "He's still trying to manipulate us." Thorn plunged back down the ramp and into the dark, copper-lined subterranean chamber. The moment he left the mill floor, the roar of the static diminished, replaced by the faint, underlying, bone-deep hum of the siren's resonance in the rock. He reached Vance's control station. The computers, though old, were still powered. He frantically searched the files for Quiet. He found it, a file locked by a complex encryption. He needed a key. "Vance!" Thorn yelled into his radio, the signal barely cutting through the rock and the interference upstairs. "I need the encryption key for Quiet." Upstairs, Reyes had to shout the demand at the frantic scientist. Vance, still writhing, managed to sputter the key code, the year the project was defunded. 1978. Thorn typed the code. The file opened instantly. It was a dense data package, a complex wave inversion pattern designed to cancel out the specific resonance frequency of the grid. He located the main broadcast control interface, a simple panel with a massive, manual lever labeled antenna feed. Thorn connected the opened Quiet file to the interface. He stared at the lever, feeling the familiar, nauseating hum of the resonance intensifying in the isolated chamber. If he broadcasted the wrong signal, or if Vance was lying, this could trigger the detonation or amplify the siren's power beyond control. He trusted his gut over the madman's word. He pulled the lever down, hard. A single, powerful, non-audible wave surged through the antenna feed. Upstairs, the effect was immediate and dramatic. The high-pitched whine of the siren, the resonance in the rock, didn't stop. It simply reversed. The white noise from Reyes's radio was suddenly sucked out of the air. The townsfolk, who had been writhing, collapsed silently to the floor. In the subterranean chamber, Thorn felt a physical pressure on his eardrums, the strange sensation of a sound being actively cancelled. He raced back up the ramp to the mill floor. Reyes was standing over the radio, which was now emitting only a faint click, completely dead. The townsfolk were sprawled across the loading bay, unconscious, but seemingly unharmed. "Did it work, Detective?" Reyes asked, dropping her spent radio. "We reversed the frequency," Thorne said, surveying the eerie scene of the silent, unconscious townspeople. "We flooded the grid with the anti-signal. But the power source is still active. The resonance is neutralized, but the array is still drawing energy from the Earth." He looked at Vance. The scientist was now limp, his head lolling against the beam, exhausted and defeated. "The grid is broken, Vance." "What now?" Vance opened his eyes, the milky white orbs reflecting the dim light, and spoke, his voice dangerously low. "The system is autonomous now, Thorne. You stopped the broadcast, but you only temporarily broke the connection. The grid will naturally re-establish the resonance in 1 hour. It requires the focal point, the core collector, to be active." He gestured to the remnants of the array. "The central power conduit must be completely, physically destroyed. Not just cut. Destroyed beyond repair." "And how do we do that?" Thorne asked, his mind racing. Vance gave a weak, final, triumphant smile. "The old Blackwood mill runs on a geothermal steam core, buried deep below the main floor. The vent stack runs right through the original site of the array. If you can detonate a massive charge inside that vent stack, you will collapse the steam core and seal the fault line. The array will be starved of its perpetual energy source." He paused, a dark, calculating look passing over his face. "But the pressure in the geothermal core is volatile. If you set the charge, you will have less than 60 seconds to get out of the entire mill before the resulting explosion and steam surge vaporizes everything within a quarter mile." The townsfolk were safe for now, but Thorne and Reyes had 1 hour to become demolition experts and neutralize the energy source, a task that almost guaranteed their own death. Would you like me to continue with Part 9, where Thorne and Reyes attempt to plant the charge in the volatile geothermal core vent, with the time limit of 1 hour bearing down on them? Fan Hoi 9. The Silent Siren, Part 9, The Volatile Core. The scent of ozone and steam replaced the smell of dust and terror in the Blackwood mill. The clock was ticking down from 60 minutes, the time limit Vance had given before the grid's resonance would automatically re-establish and initiate the true harvest. Thorne released Vance, who was now a defeated, exhausted shell of a man. "Reyes, keep watch on Vance. He's defeated, but he's our only source of structural knowledge. I need to find the geothermal core vent. It should be under the main foundation where the array was." Thorne and Reyes retrieved Jason Price, the fourth intended victim, from the stationary trolley and secured him outside the mill, hidden in the brush, a small act of humanity in the face of mass disaster. Back inside, Thorne examined the damage. The severed cables and the blast from the storage room had created a chaos that was now their cover. He located the secondary conduit Reyes had cut earlier, tracing its path to the ground. It led to a thick, circular plate, a service access hatch beneath the defunct Purification Array. "This is the access to the core, Reyes," Thorne said, pointing to the rusted handle. "Vance, talk to me. What are we looking for?" Vance, leaning weakly against the wall, pointed with a trembling hand toward the plate. "Beneath that hatch lies the geothermal vent stack. It was originally designed to vent excess steam from the town's early power system. Project Siren simply utilized the stable pressure as its primary energy tap. You must plant the charge not on the core itself, but inside the stack, where the pressure is highest and the steam is superheated." Reyes, meanwhile, had found an old, heavy-duty crate in the corner. Inside were coils of blasting wire and 2 sticks of what looked like ancient, crystallized industrial dynamite, left over from the mill's logging days. They were unstable and highly dangerous. "We have 2 unstable sticks of dynamite, Detective," Reyes reported grimly. "We need to rig a timer and a fuse, and we need to make sure the charge is big enough to shatter the core. We use both, Thorne decided, recognizing the necessity of extreme force. And we use the longest wire we can find. Vance, how wide is the stack, and how far down does it go? The stack is a narrow, 12-inch iron pipe, extending 20 feet down to the steam core, Vance whispered. The pressure down there, it's 300 degrees Celsius and rising. The blast fuse must be heat-resistant, or it will ignite prematurely. Thorne cursed. The dynamite's fuse was likely standard cotton cord. Reyes, the copper lining on the walls of Vance's lab, Thorne said, his mind racing. Copper is a good heat sink. We'll use the blasting wire to connect the sticks, then wrap them tightly in that copper to buy us a few extra seconds of insulation against the steam. Thorne and Reyes descended back into the subterranean chamber. They meticulously peeled sections of the copper-plated insulation off the walls, then wrapped the 2 sticks of unstable dynamite together, creating a custom thermal shield. It was a crude, high-stakes science experiment. The access hatch was a brutal task, rusted shut by decades of steam and disuse. They eventually pried it open with a crowbar, revealing a circular, 12-inch gap leading into absolute darkness. A plume of hot, sulfurous steam instantly hissed up, smelling of burnt metal and deep earth. We can't just drop it, Detective. It needs to be placed at the 20-foot mark, Reyes said, sweating heavily from the heat. We used the blasting wire itself to lower it, Thorne said, tying the end of the long wire securely around the copper-wrapped charge. You hold the wire, Reyes. I'll monitor the time. Thorne set the timer on his watch for 59 minutes, leaving them 1 minute to escape once the charge was set. They slowly fed the charge into the hissing darkness of the vent stack. Steam blasted their faces, burning their exposed skin. 10 feet. Reyes counted, the wire sliding through her heavily gloved hands. 20 feet. Stop! Thorne commanded. The charge was set. Now, the impossible escape. As they began reeling in the excess wire, a violent tremor, not caused by the siren, but by the destabilized ground, shook the mill. A large section of the ceiling, weakened by the siren's previous resonance, collapsed right near Vance's location. Thorne scrambled up to the mill floor. Vance was gone, buried under the rubble. Vance! Thorne yelled. A faint, muffled voice replied from beneath the debris, he's still alive. Trapped. Reyes pointed to a sliver of military jacket visible beneath a steel beam. We can't stop, Reyes. We have 58 minutes before the grid reactivates, and 1 minute to escape after we set the fuse. We have to get clear now. But he's the only one who knows the layout of the tunnels below the mill's foundation. If the collapse has blocked our way out. Thorne was faced with a brutal choice: leave the madman to die and risk getting trapped in the tunnel, or waste precious time trying to save him and risk missing their escape window. Thorne looked at the townspeople, still sprawled unconscious on the floor. Saving them meant destroying the mill. He grabbed a shovel and began furiously digging at the rubble, his final sliver of humanity overriding his duty. We're taking him with us, Reyes. If he dies, we're navigating this maze blind when the steam core blows. Would you like me to continue with Part 10, where Thorne and Reyes struggle to extract Vance before the detonation, forcing them to use the old tunnels for their desperate escape? Fan Hoi 10. The Silent Siren, Part 10, the 60-second window. The air in the mill was thick with steam and dust. The timer on Thorne's watch showed 57:45, the time remaining until the siren's resonance would automatically reset. Thorne and Reyes frantically dug at the collapsed beam and rock, struggling to reach Vance. The mill groaned around them, protesting the sudden shift in subterranean pressure. His leg is pinned, Detective. Reyes grunted, straining against the heavy beam. We need something with leverage. Thorne scanned the wreckage. The massive, defunct crane cable that had snapped earlier was still coiled nearby. He grabbed the thick steel wire. "We'll use the winch from the trolley control unit. We need to move that beam." They worked with desperate speed, rigging the heavy cable around the fallen beam and connecting it to the small, motorized trolley that had carried the fourth victim. With the power limited, it took agonizing seconds for the trolley's winch to strain, slowly dragging the beam away from Vance. Vance was pulled free, coughing violently, his right leg clearly broken. "The geothermal core, it's unstable," Vance wheezed, clutching his thigh. "The tremors, they've opened a new path in the sublevel." Thorne and Reyes supported the injured scientist, dragging him toward the main ramp. "Which path, Vance?" "We have to get out of the mill's perimeter in under a minute once the fuse is lit," Thorne demanded. "The old pressure relief tunnel," Vance whispered, pointing vaguely towards the shattered foundations of the mill district. "It runs parallel to the river and exits into the woods, a mile away. It was my emergency route." As they reached the top of the ramp, Thorne checked his watch, 56:12. Time to light the fuse. Thorne carried the remaining length of the blasting wire, which was connected directly to the highly volatile charge 20 feet down the vent stack. He quickly stripped the copper shielding from the end of the fuse, exposing the delicate, heat-resistant filament. "Reyes, keep Vance moving toward the maintenance tunnel. I'm initiating the countdown." Thorne pulled out a flare, one of the old, reliable distress flares from the precinct kit. He pressed the exposed fuse filament against the flare's intensely burning magnesium flame. The filament flared bright red, and the fuse began to burn rapidly, fizzing down the vent stack with a dangerous speed. The 60-second escape window had begun. Escape timer, 58 seconds. Thorne threw the flare aside and sprinted, catching up with Reyes and Vance, who were already halfway into the dark maintenance tunnel. 50 seconds. Thorne shouted, supporting Vance's dead weight. The tunnel was long, winding, and completely disorienting. Reyes, her flashlight beam dancing wildly, was trying to navigate the complex junction points. "Left or right, Vance?" "The pressure relief tunnel," Reyes yelled. "Right. The one descending. It runs deeper, under the main fault line." Vance gasped, his face pale with pain and fear. They plunged down the steep, narrow tunnel. The roar of the steam core was becoming deafening, echoing up the passage behind them. The heat was immense, quickly sapping their energy. Escape timer, 30 seconds. They heard the first sign of the impending disaster, a massive, metallic groan that signified the final structural failure of the mill's foundation. The tunnel walls began to shake violently. "The core is buckling. The pressure is critical," Thorne yelled, dragging Vance by his collar. "Wait! Stop!" Reyes cried, her flashlight beam catching a flash of bright red paint on the wall. It was a faded, hand-painted sign, "Dead END, geothermal vent only." "Vance, you led us the wrong way," Thorne roared, shoving the scientist against the damp rock wall. Vance, staring blindly into the void, gave a final, desperate confession. "I had to. The pressure relief tunnel, it was my escape route. I wired the detonator to collapse the entrance behind me. If I died, I wouldn't allow anyone else to survive." Escape timer, 15 seconds. They were trapped in a dead end, directly above the explosive charge. The sound of the pressurized steam core was now a continuous, screaming whine. "Reyes, the collapsing ceiling!" Thorne screamed, pointing to a large gap in the rock that had been opened by the earlier tremors. It was too small to climb through, but it led upwards. "We go up. Find an exit to the surface." Thorne pulled Vance's limp body and began shoving him upward into the narrow fissure. Reyes followed, using her arms and legs to scramble up the jagged rock face. Thorne went last, kicking away debris, trying to seal the hole below them. Escape timer, 5 seconds. They climbed frantically, emerging into a tiny, forgotten crawlspace, dusty and stale. They pressed themselves against the damp ceiling. Escape timer, 2 seconds. Thorn covered his ears and braced for the blast. 0. Instead of a deafening explosion, there was a single, massive boom, followed by the terrifying sound of implosion. The sound was instantly replaced by a sustained, violent roar, as an unimaginable volume of pressurized steam was released. The entire mill structure above them was pulverized and atomized into a colossal cloud of boiling vapor. The crawlspace floor beneath them violently shuddered, and then was still. Thorn and Reyes were covered in dust, soot, and sweat. They were alive. The silent siren was silenced. They slowly crawled out of the vent into the damp, morning air. The Blackwood sawmill was gone, replaced by a massive, smoking, water-filled crater. Below them, the 36 unconscious townsfolk were slowly beginning to stir in the clearing, dazed but alive. Thorn turned to Vance, who was now lying in the dust, his feverish eyes staring at the smoking void. "You saved the town, Detective," Vance whispered, his voice weak. "But you destroyed the discovery. The energy." "The energy belongs to no one, Vance," Thorn said, standing over the scientist. "It just wants to be quiet." "Would you like me to continue with Part 11, where Thorn and Reyes deal with the immediate aftermath, the media scrutiny, and the disturbing long-term effects of the resonance on the surviving townsfolk of Silverwood?" Fan Hoy 11. The Silent Siren, Part 11, The Aftermath and the Resonance Echo. The aftermath was a nightmare of jurisdiction and disbelief. The massive, steaming crater where the Blackwood sawmill once stood was tangible evidence, but the explanation, a Cold War scientist, a psychic energy grid, and a geothermal steam core detonation, was too fantastic for any official report. Thorn and Reyes spent the next 3 days giving sanitized, fragmented accounts: a massive industrial equipment failure, an explosion triggered by the unstable dynamite found on the scene, and a rescue effort that saved the townsfolk who had been gathered for an illegal, late-night meeting. Elias Vance, thanks to Thorn's quick thinking, was medically stabilized and transferred to a high-security psychiatric facility under a strict media blackout. The townsfolk, including Mr. Henderson, woke up dazed, confused, and suffering from severe, transient migraines, but with no memory of the unified march or the strange, collective singing. Life in Silverwood attempted to return to normal, but Thorn felt a fundamental shift had occurred. The town was quieter, almost unnaturally so. 1 week after the explosion, Thorn and Reyes were in the precinct, sifting through the final bureaucratic paperwork. Thorn was preparing to close the case as a mass casualty prevention, industrial sabotage. "The official narrative is holding, Detective," Reyes said, sliding a file across the desk. "Vance is locked up. The mill is a crater. Silverwood is recovering." "No, Reyes, Silverwood is listening," Thorn corrected, rubbing the permanent crick in his neck. He hadn't slept soundly since the incident. "The resonance is gone, but the town itself was tuned. And tuning leaves a mark." Thorn opened a case folder on his desk. It contained files on local crimes reported in the last 3 days, minor offenses, mostly. Mrs. Gable reported that she knew exactly where her neighbor kept his hidden spare house key. Mr. Chen, no relation to victim, claimed he woke up knowing the precise combination to his old safe deposit box, which he'd forgotten years ago. A teenage boy was arrested after describing in perfect detail the location of the stolen wallet of a tourist he had never met. "Small things," Reyes admitted, "but it's weird. It's like their subconscious thoughts are leaking out. It's an echo of the grid." Thorn picked up a local newspaper. The headline wasn't about the mill, but about the town's uncanny victory in a regional high school chess tournament. The team had played with unnatural, collective brilliance. "The resonance is gone, but the collective mind that Vance created, the unified consciousness, is still there," Thorn mused. "It's fractured, chaotic, but it allows for temporary, random spikes of shared thought. A localized, low-level telepathy. He looked up at Reyes. The silent siren didn't just extract pain. It temporarily erased the walls between their minds. And those walls are slow to rebuild. Suddenly, the phone rang. It was the security officer from the maximum security psychiatric facility where Vance was held. "Detective Thorne, we have a major problem. Elias Vance, he's gone." "Gone? How?" "He was injured and under armed guard." "He didn't escape, Detective. He didn't move. He simply ceased to be. His body, his clothing, the bed he was lying on, all intact. But the consciousness, the life, gone." The officer sounded genuinely terrified. "We checked the security footage. The cameras failed for exactly 6 seconds. When they came back on, Vance's body was there, but he was clinically dead. No trauma, no pulse, no brain activity. It was the same, perfect cessation, that he inflicted on his victims." Thorne's blood ran cold. The perfection of the silent siren's cut was repeated not on the body, but on the soul. "And before the cameras failed, Detective," the officer continued, his voice trembling, "Vance was staring at the ceiling. And he was whispering something. Just one phrase, over and over." "What was it?" "He said, 'The harvest is portable now. The silence is perfect.'" Thorne slammed the phone down. Vance hadn't needed to survive in Silverwood. He had achieved his final, ultimate goal, transferring the essence of the Siren Project, the method of clean extraction, from the physical grid into his own mind. Thorne looked at Reyes, his eyes wide with a horrifying realization. "Reyes," Thorne said, his voice flat. "The siren isn't silenced. Vance just became the new, mobile core collector." And then, he heard it. A faint, almost imperceptible sound that only he seemed to perceive. The high-pitched, distant whine of the silent siren, but this time, it seemed to come from somewhere far away, perhaps across state lines, traveling on a non-physical frequency. Would you like me to continue with the final section, Part 12, where Thorne and Reyes confront the chilling realization that the silent siren is now a countrywide threat, and they must determine the new rules of engagement? Fanhoy 12. The Silent Siren, Part 12, The Portable Harvest. Thorne felt the faint, high-pitched whine vibrating in the air, the phantom sound of the silent siren, but this time, it was a ghost of a sound, far too weak to be physical. It was the sound of a memory, a digital broadcast imprinted onto the fabric of the atmosphere itself. "Vance is gone," Thorne repeated, his voice low and strained. His body died, but his consciousness, or the energy he harvested, found a new host. The Siren Project wasn't about the machine, Reyes. It was about the process of clean extraction. And now, the process is portable. Reyes stared at the phone, her hands shaking slightly. He said the harvest is portable now. He didn't transfer the energy, he transferred the knowledge of how to execute the clean separation. Thorne picked up the newspaper again, his eyes scanning the national news section with a new, terrifying focus. He wasn't looking for crime now, he was looking for anomalies. He found it. A small article buried on page 7, reporting a mysterious, simultaneous collapse of 3 elderly patients, all suffering from aggressive, terminal cancer, in a hospital in Arizona, 2,000 miles away. "Look at this, Reyes," Thorne pointed to the article. 3 people. Same severe, terminal affliction. Simultaneous, unexplained death. The report says no cause of death was immediately apparent. It was a perfect cessation, the harvest. Reyes leaned over the newspaper, her eyes wide with dread. The grid wasn't a physical structure. The grid was the fault line, Detective. And Vance realized that the Earth's entire crust is a fault line network. The siren frequency can travel through the rock and the atmosphere, tuning a local area for a quick, efficient extraction. Vance didn't need to rebuild the array. He just needed to initiate the tuning frequency remotely, Thorne stated. He could have transferred his own pure consciousness energy into the atmosphere the moment he died, making his final thought the ultimate, untraceable broadcast. He is the ghost in the machine, and the machine is the world. The stakes had escalated from a town-level disaster to a global, invisible threat. Elias Vance, dead and gone, was now continuing the harvest as a disembodied, brilliant, malevolent force. "We need to find the pattern, Reyes," Thorne said, grabbing the national map. "Where did the victims die? We need to plot them out, find the points of convergence." Vance still requires a source of stable energy to maintain the broadcast, a new array, whether it's a person, a place, or a hidden structure. Thorne began marking the Arizona location on the map. The first remote harvest, Arizona. The pattern, 3 terminal cancer patients. He noticed a chilling correlation to the Silverwood victims: heart, epilepsy, cancer. All conditions that caused profound, isolated suffering. Vance is harvesting the energy of terminal pain wherever he finds it, Thorne concluded. He is fulfilling Project Siren's original mandate on a massive scale, using the global network of human suffering as his infinite power source. As Thorne spoke, Reyes received a digital alert on her official police tablet, an automated notification she had set up to flag unexplained, mass casualty events across the country. The notification was from a large retirement home in New York. A dozen elderly residents had died in their sleep, simultaneously and without medical explanation. The common factor? Every one of them was suffering from debilitating, end-stage Alzheimer's disease. "New York," Reyes whispered, her hand trembling as she circled the location on the map. "Alzheimer's. Severe cognitive decline. That is focused, isolating pain, detective. That's the next source of the harvest." Thorne stared at the 2 remote points, Arizona and New York, on the map. He realized their investigation could no longer be localized to Silverwood. "The rules have changed, Reyes. We are no longer chasing a physical killer. We are hunting a frequency. We need to find the one place, the one structure, or the one mind, that is strong enough to maintain that invisible broadcast across the entire continent." Thorne looked at the shattered remains of the old police radio on the desk, the source of the chaotic static that had temporarily saved Silverwood. Vance's counter-signal, the quiet file, is still the only weapon we have. But we can't broadcast it from one old mill anymore. We need a signal strong enough to cancel out the global siren frequency. Thorne looked at the national map, then back at the remnants of Silverwood, now eerily quiet and still. "We go to the source,"